Hello everyone, just Gord here and welcome back to another Planet Zoo real life inspiration video. Happy New Year and sorry for missing last week's upload. My computer was broken for a while, so I ran out of my backlog. And last week I was busy setting up my new PC, so hopefully the problems should be fixed. But anyway, let's get into some chimpanzee habitats because this is quite a long video. Especially because we are starting with a brand new chimpanzee habitat. This habitat opened last month in Dierenpark Amersfoort. So of course we're going to cover this one in a little bit more detail than what we usually do. Of course, as always, you can skip ahead with the timestamps in the description if you so wish. But yeah, we are entering the Chimpanzee Valley over here, and right away we see this giant netted structure looming over us. Yes, this zoo did choose for a netted enclosure for the chimpanzees, mainly because they like to bring you as close to the animals as possible, and a netted structure like this does allow you to do that and give you lots of glass viewing points like the one over here. And here we can also see why it's called the Chimpanzee Valley. We've got this big hill on the left and kind of the valley below. That's what the enclosure is. We've got a bunch of really nice climbing frames, and we can also see a big tree stump that we are going to right now, because as Amersfoort usually does, they've got these adventure routes that give you unique views of the animals and also kind of a unique experience. In this case, letting you climb around in the trees like a chimpanzee along these rope bridges, also allowing you to enter this little chimpanzee nest over here where there's some education scattered around as well. And over here we are entering the big tree stump, which gives us a bunch of cool views into the enclosure from a more elevated position. And the chimpanzees can also get up here. You can see there was some food dropped over there trying to lure them over, so you could get really up close with the chimpanzees, even up here as well, which is just super cool. You can go down either via the climbing thing, which I don't think I fit through, so I'm gonna take the slide instead. These are pretty common around the zoo as well. Most of these adventure routes end in a slide. Yeah, here we got the tree stump up close. We can also see there's a little bat shelter thingy attached to it, which is nice. Always cool to see that. And yeah, on the inside we've got some more education about the chimpanzee's diet, and we've got even more views into the enclosure from down here as well, including this little tunnel thing, tree stump route, whatever you call it, that really gets you kind of a peek even further into the enclosure and even closer to the chimpanzees, I suppose. What's really cool as well is that the supports for the rope bridges are painted like tree stump, and not just that, the bottoms are actually covered with faux tree bark to really give it that texture of a tree as well. Over here, I absolutely love whenever zoos do this. We've got the tire tracks going through the glass, really tying the visitor area and the enclosure together, and they also do that in other ways, like having the charcoal container both inside the enclosure as well as on the outside over here. And yeah, charcoal, that's a big theme of this area, how charcoal and deforestation are of course a major threat to chimps. Here we are entering Chimpala, the research camp, and we've got a little button having the researchers greet us into their camp. And yeah, I'm not 100% sold on the name. It sounds like the type of name you would find in Auwans Dierenpark with their Pandasia and Koalia. But the research camp itself is really cute. We've got this small bunker-like structure with a bunch of props and theming around, a bunch of education about the chimpanzees in Tanzania. We can also in the background see a picture of Jane Goodall, the famous chimpanzee researcher. And there is this game over here, which is really cool. We've got a big sand pit. There are some spades that you can dig around the sand with, but I just use my hands. You've got a bunch of chimpanzees over there, and your goal is to lead them to the food. And how you do that is by making a pile of sand, and on the pile of sand some trees will grow, and that will allow the chimps to walk across that area. There are also forest fires around, burning down the forest that you created, so you have to keep raising the sand to create new forests and help out the chimps reach their food. It's a really fun, unique game, and definitely unique. I've never seen anything like it. It's really cool. Over here we've got a little area where the researchers are planting trees to of course help with reforestation, and you can also help accomplish this by donating some money over here, just using your PIN card, and you will see how the money is transported from the Netherlands to Africa, where it is used to plant trees. It is so freaking adorable. I absolutely love this little Rube Goldberg machine. Yeah, big fan of that. Now over here we reach the other side of the chimpanzee enclosure. We've got the big gate, which they covered up with some education. I think they did the same thing with the spectacled bears, and I think that's a really clever way of using all the space that's available to you and not hiding your backstages, but just making a feature out of them. So here's a really cool educational thing as well. This is all about doing research, and we've got a little video playing, and you have to count how many chimpanzees you see in the video. And if you answer the correct answer, you will get a very special message.
Hello, this is Jane Goodall. I hear you did a great job of research. Thank you again. Wow!
So they actually got Jane Goodall to record that video for them, which is just super awesome. And then on the left over here, we have even more interactive stuff where you can actually play as a researcher and see which of the chimpanzees you've seen and where you've seen them in the enclosure. So that's just really cute. Then we get to more glass viewing areas over here with a nice grandstand area for people to sit and maybe watch a presentation on the chimpanzees. Over here is a cool enrichment item. It's a faux log that food can be put inside of that the chimpanzees will have to use like sticks or their fingers to get out. If you actually watch the Bonobo real life inspiration video, you'll see similar feeders in the zoo of Pankendal, but there it's termite mounds and not logs. So yeah, over here we are slowly making our way to the indoor area. We have a beautiful wooden facade in front of the building, and the inside of the building is actually kind of similar to some other indoor areas in the zoo, like the Albertine Tortoise building or the elephant stall. We've got a central area over here with glass all around, allowing us to look into the different enclosures, because there are a few separation areas. We can also see that the gate outside is actually kind of near the ceiling on that enclosure, because of course we got that big hill up against this building, but two of the other exits are just on the ground level here. We've got tons of climbing frames all around. It's absolutely beautiful, and there's so much height. Lastly, in here there is a nice wall of all the different chimpanzees that live in here, a little portrait of them, really cool. And then here there's some backstage access as well, and you can see a double gate system in the back there to get into the enclosure from this side as well. And yeah, that is pretty much it for the new enclosures. Let's have a quick look at what they used to have, and you'll see why this enclosure was so desperately needed, because this is not a chimpanzee enclosure that a modern zoo should have. It was absolutely hideous and just straight up depressing looking. The only thing that I liked about this enclosure was the fact that the chimpanzees had a slide. And I do wonder if they are missing their slide now, or if they just never used it in the first place. But yeah, I'm just really glad that this mesh mess is disappearing soon, because it just was probably the worst enclosure in the zoo, if you ask me. And maybe I'm forgetting about some obscure other bad enclosure. But yeah, as you can see, it's already blocked off and it will probably disappear in the near future. So let's move away from Amersfoort and go to the Zoo of Antwerp, where we've got another meshed over enclosure with a bunch of glass viewing areas. The viewing areas here are a bit more modern, a bit less themed overall, I would say, but the enclosure is not bad at all. We've got a whole bunch of climbing frames spread all throughout the enclosure, which is relatively spacious, I would say. It doesn't feel too small to me. On the inside over here, we've got a bunch of cool education about the different faces that they might make and the emotions that they convey. Over here we've got the area that kind of transitions from the indoor enclosures into the outdoor enclosures, and we can see all of their indoor enclosures over here. These are kind of their separation enclosures, which can be separated from one another if they need to separate a certain individual. But there is also a much larger shared indoor enclosure. There's actually two of these, which they use for both the chimpanzees and the gorillas. It just depends which animal needs it at that moment. But yeah, in this case over here you can see there were some chimpanzees. But I have also seen the gorillas use these spaces before when they were cleaning out the other gorilla enclosure, for instance. Judging by all the climbing frames, I do feel like this one's mainly intended for chimpanzees, but I'm not 100% sure about that. Anyway, on the back of the primate house over here, we've got more views into the separation areas. These ones are for the gorillas, but the chimps are just right beside them. And I have actually seen it before that the chimps were making lots of noise, and the gorilla got really upset that the silverback like banged the wall to get them to be quiet. So that kind of made me wonder a little bit if this is an ideal situation, or if the chimps are making the gorilla stressed or something like that, but I'm sure it's fine. But yeah, over here on this side we have a bunch more views into the enclosure. There's like a total of or 5 or 6 of these viewing points, and these ones get you a lot closer to all the different climbing frames. So if the chimps were outside and climbing around, you would be getting amazing views of them. We can also see there's a little puzzle feeder over there in the front, so if there would be food in there, you could get a really nice look at the chimps using that. But yeah, over here all the way in the edge of the enclosure is the last viewing point. I doubt that the chimps would ever come here that often. Like, it seems like a bit of a dead end sort of area. I don't know. Anyway, next up we have Artis, the Zoo of Amsterdam. And yeah, Amsterdam, being such a historical zoo, is a zoo that's kind of plagued by some really outdated enclosures, and this really is one of them. This might be one of the worst enclosures in the video. It's not the worst, sadly. There is some worse stuff coming, but yeah, it's just so small on the inside over here. And I think there might be some extra like space higher up, because there is this bridge that connects the indoor and outdoor enclosure. So I feel like in the indoor enclosures they have some elevation, there might be more space up there, but still it feels very small. And the outdoor enclosure is not much better. It's just massive mesh kind of bunker structure, and it just isn't all that big, although it does have quite a bit of climbing in there. Next up we have Safaripark Beekse Bergen. Number one, because yeah, Beekse Bergen does have 2 chimpanzee habitats. This is the indoor area of the first, and you can see the mesh ceiling, which allows the keepers to just walk on top and throw food down and stuff like that, which is really cool. Tons of climbing over here as well, and it's quite spacious with even more like separate holding in the back. As we go outside, we see a large chimpanzee island, and is this our first modded enclosure of the video? That's actually surprising. But yeah, in the back you can see there's a little place for keepers to stand and throw food down. In this case he threw down some onions, and you can see the chimps enjoying that. You can also see Wouter. He's the gray chimp in the middle there, and he is absolutely beautiful, but sadly he did pass away last year, so that was a huge loss right there. But anyway, yeah, this enclosure, it goes on for quite a while along the visitor path here. And you can see all sorts of climbing frames, a fake termite mound, as well as a bunch of little shelters throughout for the chimps to hide from rain and other elements. So yeah, it's a really, really lovely enclosure, just because of all the space that it offers. And the second enclosure of the zoo is very similar. It has a similar backstage building, as you can see in the back. There's a much larger climbing frame over here in the front. Now you might be wondering, this enclosure looks a lot less big than the one we just saw, but the enclosure actually extends underneath a bridge, and on the other side there is a lot more space for the chimps, even more climbing frames and shelters as well. This doesn't always look this barren, by the way. Depending on the time of year, it can actually look super lush. And now I quickly do want to touch on modded enclosures, because while it is my preferred way to look at chimps, it does come with its risks. And I think this enclosure is actually quite a good example of that, because it has happened in the past here that a chimpanzee has drowned in the mode. A conflict would arise in the group. That's something that happens with chimpanzees. The social dynamics of the group are always being challenged, and if during such a conflict a chimp falls in the mode, there's a large chance that they will pass away, which is also why modded enclosures aren't always recommended anymore. There are also people making counter arguments to that, saying that the design of the enclosure plays a huge role, but I thought it was something that's worth mentioning. Anyway, next up we are at the Zoo of Berlin, and we have a brief glimpse into the kitchen of the primate house over here before skipping to the indoor chimpanzee enclosure right over here. And you can see it's got a pretty interesting layout. There's a biofloor in the front, but there's just concrete in the back. Probably some renovation is to blame for that inconsistency, but it was an okay indoor enclosure. The outdoor enclosure is also alright. It doesn't look like it's the biggest of enclosures, but it does look very nice with all the natural elements and foliage and the rockwork in the back. But yeah, I do think Berlin Zoo is one of those zoos where I really wish they weren't trying to have every type of primate and just focus on a couple and give them some more space, because yeah, this could be better. Next up we have Bergzoo. Bergzoo is actually a really interesting case. This was one of the first zoos in the world that actually tried holding a large social group of chimpanzees with more than one male, as you would see in the wild. And they were so successful with that they became one of the most studied zoos in terms of chimpanzee groups. Many researchers came over here to observe the behavior of this chimpanzee group because it was so close to what you would have in the wild. A lot of zoos didn't think it could be done in captivity, but Berg has really proved them wrong, and of course now it's kind of the standard of chimpanzee husbandry. And I'm pretty sure this is just the enclosure that they've always had ever since 1971, I believe, which is just insane because it's such a good enclosure still to today's standards. Over here in the indoor area as well, there is a ton of space for them, a nice climbing structure, and in the back you can see kind of this observation room where researchers can stand and observe the chimps as they're in here, which is of course really important for all that research that I just mentioned. So yeah, really, really cool enclosure, and also look at that absolutely adorable baby right there. Next up we have Dierenpark or Eindhoven Zoo, and over here we are entering this indoor playground because right next to the indoor playground is actually the indoor viewing of the chimpanzees right here through all of this glass. We can see that it's a very similar setup to Beekse Bergen with the mesh roof over there, and a nice biofloor as well. And there are some nice design elements with the path kind of going through the window here and even back out the other side. The outdoor enclosure you will encounter kind of at the end of the walking route, and you can either go right or left. We are going right first, where we have a nice viewing area over here where we have a great view of these shelters beautifully integrated into the hill over there. There's also some lovely natural looking climbing frames, and all the way on the right we can see there's the indoor area with a viewing area next to it as well. So if we're making our way around that wall, this is where that viewing area is. It's a nicely decorated area where you can get up close and personal. So this is really a great way to get the best of both worlds, where over here, if you're lucky, you can get up close with the chimps, but you still have the moated enclosure as well to get kind of an unobstructed view of them. As we walk along, there's a few more viewing areas into the indoor area. This one is inside a little tent, which is really cute, and this one just has some nice decorations around it and also has some habitat immersion. That concrete blob in the front also is on the inside, and here we're on the other side of that path through the indoor area. So back at that split, if we took the left path, we're just going to go further and further around the enclosure, and we see it from the other side. There's more shelters and yeah, more little viewing areas as well. If we keep going a little bit, and we can actually see that one time I was at the zoo over here, the door to the backstage was open, so I could have a quick peek around. You can see there are some ladders to get up to that mesh roof where the keepers can throw some food down. There's some just keeper equipment and the backstage holding as well. Next up we are in Bergzoo Halle, and the chimpanzee over here are inside of this little tropical house, which is basically a South America house. There's a free roaming sloth, there's some smaller monkeys, there's birds, South American porcupine, and there is the chimpanzees for some reason. But I will say this is a lovely little indoor area. I absolutely love this faux tree in the middle there holding up the mesh structure as well. And then yeah, there's nice bits of climbing all around. There's a second viewing area over here as well, where you can see a little bit more of everything. Now I will say one thing, and I will say that especially about the outdoor enclosure as well, is that I think this zoo is a great example of how the appeal of an exhibit can really change your perception of it, because this exhibit really isn't all that big. The indoor area is fine, I would say, but the outdoor area is actually quite small. If you compare that to something like Amsterdam, I think Amsterdam would be bigger, and especially has more height to it. But this enclosure is just so beautiful that it becomes almost easy to overlook that kind of stuff. I think it is mostly fine, especially because the zoo only has a couple of chimpanzees, so they don't have a very large group. But yeah, I do think it's an interesting phenomenon. I'm actually pretty curious what this enclosure would look like in the winter. Let's see if it looks any more depressing, because, I mean, just look at this. It's so gorgeous. But yeah, that's it for Bergzoo Halle. Let's move on to the Erlebnis-zoo Hannover, where we are entering Affi Mountain. And the first enclosure we encounter over here in Affi Mountain is the chimpanzee enclosure. We got a little school area on the right, and from this little school area we also have a view into the enclosure with some habitat immersion, the visitor area kind of bleeding into the enclosure a little bit. There's some beautiful rock work and faux baobab trees, foliage all around. Only thing that I'm really missing in this enclosure are the climbing frames. There are some ropes and rope bridges and they can climb the rock work and the walls, but still I feel like there should be a little bit more in here. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it looks absolutely beautiful. And yeah, we just have one more peek over here in the back, and you can on the left over there also see where the chimpanzees can enter their backstage area. Now let's have a little look at that as well. The backstage is a lot older than the exhibit itself. We are in this kind of rainforest house, and the backstage chimpanzee is this kind of concrete thing over here. So not the prettiest looking thing, but it's quite impressive that they managed to design this beautiful modern habitat around an existing backstage structure. I think that's pretty cool. Next up, we are entering Bongoland, the primate area of the Zoo of Leipzig. And also over here, the first animal that we encounter is the chimpanzee through this little cave viewing area over here. We've got a beautiful lush enclosure over here. It is absolutely massive, and it also offers a variety of viewing areas. Like you can see, we just had a glass viewing area, and here we can see that there's people walking on this bridge where we have a moat between us and the chimpanzees, and we just have an unobstructed view of them and their gorgeous exhibit over here. We can also see tons of climbing frames, natural trees. There's just so much joy to be had for the chimpanzees in here. This enclosure over here is about 4,000 square meters, I think even more than that. And yeah, as we enter the indoor area over here, we have one more glass viewing area. And yeah, just look at that. It's phenomenal. As we enter over here, we have this little cave area where once again we have a glass view, some puzzle box enrichment items. But what's the coolest about this indoor area is that it's just a huge tropical house with open exhibits. So there's unobstructed views even into the indoor areas of these great apes. It's so freaking great, although it does come with the sacrifice of more climbing frames, because with an open enclosure like this, you can only have so many climbing frames before you get too close to the walls and create escape opportunities. So that's the one downside. That wasn't the only chimpanzee enclosure, however. There is actually a second one over here on the left, which is just absolutely insane. Not only do they have every species of primate in this house, they even have a second enclosure for the chimpanzees, and none of the enclosures, in my opinion, feel necessarily too small or anything. This enclosure is smaller than the other chimpanzee enclosure, but that's mainly because this one is only used for the younger chimpanzees, while the other one is made for the more adults. So over here on the outside there is also a second outdoor enclosure for the younger chimpanzees, and this one is also a lot smaller. This one is like 1,500 square meters as opposed to the 4 point something thousand on the other side. Also over here we have several types of views, a glass view and two different moded views. It's just insane how well put together this area is. Then we have the Zoo of Magdeburg, where we can take a nice seat at this beautiful outlook over here and enjoy the chimpanzees in the back, but we can also get a lot more up close to them thanks to a number of nice little viewing points littered throughout the walking route alongside this enclosure. You can see there's also a little telescope over there, and here's a larger viewing point where you can get really up close, like right next to the water. There's a whole path that goes alongside the enclosure here, but sadly that was closed off due to some construction work, so I couldn't really enjoy that path, and instead had to look at the enclosure from all the way across all of this, these reeds and stuff like that. So didn't really get a great view of the main enclosure here. It does look like you would be walking across a bridge over there, which looks like so much fun, but yeah, I didn't really see much of that. I did see a lot of the indoor enclosure over here, however. As you can see, it is inside a nice little greenhouse with a lot of foliage and stuff over here on the visitor side. The visitor side is really, really nicely decorated. Sadly, I cannot say the same for the enclosure. We've got some interesting enrichment items over there. It looks like something of a seesaw, a really nicely decorated fake termite mound, but it's just inside of this concrete hellscape. I do really like this puzzle box over here with the window next to it, so you can really see what the chimps are doing. That's really fun. But yeah, even the larger indoor exhibit over here is just super, super bland. They do have kind of a sand floor over there with some grass growing on it as well, so kind of naturalistic, I guess. But yeah, it's just so bland because of that back wall, and it really wouldn't be nice if they decorated that a little bit more. They've got so much space for it. Maybe it doesn't even matter that much for the animals, but for the guest perspective, the guest experience, this is just absolutely atrocious in my opinion. It's so boring. The back wall over there looks quite nice, thanks to all the foliage they planted there, meshed off from the chimps so they don't ruin it, I guess. But yeah, the enclosure itself is just not all that interesting. You do get really nice views also from the up part that we saw earlier. Yeah, not a lot going on here. So let's get back outside, where there is one last viewpoint of kind of a separation enclosure on this side, which is a lot smaller, but I guess this is only kind of an in-between area between the indoor and the outdoor yards. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the Zoo of Magdeburg. Next up we have Monde Sauvage, where we have a big chimpanzee island. We've got a backstage building on the island itself and some rock work kind of going around it a little bit, some climbing frames, but the island itself for the most part is just very flat and quite bland looking in my opinion. Something that is interesting is over here there's kind of a bridge that extends into the backstage area over there. That's how the keepers get on. But yeah, I don't know what they were going for with this exhibit, because I think it just looks very depressing. It looks like a prison camp with this backstage building. One of those towers almost looks like a watchtower you would see in a prison. I tried to look up what this zoo was going for, and all I could find was that they tried to recreate the biome of the animals as precisely as possible, which I do not see here. Anyway, next up is the Zoo of Osnabrück, and I remember when I first visited this zoo, I came back absolutely praising this chimpanzee habitat. I loved it so much. I do think by now I have seen better, but I still think this one is really good. We've got a lovely view from this tower up here where you can really take in just how huge this enclosure is. It is absolutely massive. There's climbing frames all around, there's natural foliage, it's lush, it's beautiful. We also have some moated views. We also have a glass view coming up. Like, there's so much variety around here, and it just looks absolutely gorgeous. I don't know how those rock walls are climb proof. They look like they're rough enough that the chimps would be able to like grab onto something. But yeah, no, it just looks gorgeous. Over here we've got a little cave. Looks like one of the chimps may have run into that glass wall in the middle there. But yeah, once again, you can get really up close with the chimps over here with these glass viewing areas. Maybe even a little too close. But yeah, it's just really cool. And then we also got the indoor area. This building is actually quite nicely covered up by all the foliage up here, allowing you to get a somewhat seamless transition into like this building that you're inside of. And then we've got the indoor area of the chimps here, which has so much verticality, which kind of goes a little unused. I feel like they could get away with putting a large climbing frame in here and making this look even more beautiful. But I do absolutely love that background over there. The mural integrated into the faux rock back there just looks absolutely gorgeous, and all the foliage growing over it just adds so much. So yeah, this is an absolutely beautiful habitat. I love this one so much. It's really cool. But yeah, that's it for the Zoo of Osnabrück. So let's move on to Pakawi Park. Now, when I visited Pakawi 2.5 years ago, they were raising money for a new home for the chimpanzees. They were even selling very overpriced Lego in order to raise money for this. And it's clear why. This enclosure is absolutely awful. This is by far the worst enclosure in the video, both from a visitor perspective, having to watch through this mesh into some kind of depressing pit, but also from an animal perspective, it's just way too small. They say they're doing everything to get this new area built, but we're over 2 years later, and from what I could tell, still nothing had been really done. They built a new gibbon island, which is part of the same project, but that's about it. Anyway, we are walking through this maze of dead birds to get to the indoor area, because for some reason the indoor area is inside of this place, which by the way is absolutely covered in dust and smelled awful. But yeah, over here we have the indoor area of the chimps. It's a very depressing metal frame in the middle of a shitty room with barely any sunlight. It's so depressing. Really, I really do hope that this new home for chimpanzees will be built soon, because anything is an improvement. This is the area where supposedly it will be built. I'm not sure how much of this space will be used for it. There is actually a lot of space behind this wall as well, so let's hope it'll be an improvement. But anyway, next up we have Stichting AAP, which is kind of ironic because this is a place that rescues monkeys from horrible conditions, including chimpanzees. And so these are the chimpanzee rescue facilities. These are the places where they rehabilitate the chimpanzees, try to get them to socialize again, because some of these chimpanzees were kept as pets and have never actually interacted with another chimpanzee before. The enclosures might not look the best, but it's the best that they can do, and the work that they do is super important, so cut them some slack, please. What's also interesting is you can see the keepers are wearing face masks and gloves, because there's some chimps in here that for scientific purposes were infected with HIV and hepatitis C. After it became illegal to conduct research on primates, the chimps were sent here. But that does mean that some of these chimps are actually a biohazard, which is pretty interesting. Next up, another zoo that really has a lot to offer. It's Zoo Erlebniswelt. We are starting on this little terrace area next to the restaurant of the Africa area, where we have a nice view of their island over here. But we don't only get to see the chimpanzees from across a moat. There are tons of other viewing points throughout this enclosure that really make it interesting and engaging and keep surprising you in new ways. So over here we've kind of got this big rock that goes into the enclosure, really getting us a lot closer to the chimps through all of these glass viewing areas. We can also see over here the moat is protected by some hot wire as well to prevent the chimpanzees from kind of running into it, I suppose. Over here we can go either left and take the boring road, or we can take the fun road on the right over here across all these cool little huts and things and stuff. And here we have a really nice overview of the enclosure, and I really do like the way that it's set up. I love the fact that they added this big hill over there. It goes a long way making the terrain a lot more interesting to look at. If you compare that to something like Monde Sauvage, which was just completely flat, this is just so much more appealing. Over here we have a really nice themed gate surrounded by the slightly less nice faux rock all around. And as we go inside, first you go past like all the hippo stuff, but skipping that, we go into the indoor area of the chimpanzees. Over here is a fun little educational thing where you can try to imitate the faces of the chimpanzees. And then here are their indoor enclosures. On either side of the path are some indoor areas with tons of climbing frames all around. So much stuff for them to do. It's really quite nice. We got some signage about all the chimps in here. You can see more glass viewing areas with more parts of the indoor enclosure. And if we look up over here, we can see this big faux log, which is actually something that the chimps can climb on to get to the other side through this glass tunnel over here. So it's pretty freaking cool right there. Then we saw this facade from the other side when we were inside of that little rock. Over here is a big glass viewing area, kind of the main viewing area of the enclosure, I almost want to say, at least for the indoor area. That's mostly true. And yeah, you can get nice and up close with the chimps to look at all their antics, especially the little baby over here. It's absolutely adorable. As we continue inside, there's even more viewing areas into the two kind of indoor areas. And yeah, you can just see all the stuff littered throughout here, making it look really nice and detailed. I love the natural climbing frames in here. It's all just really well done. Well, I say all. I'm not a big fan of the faux rock, but that's the only thing really. Nicely decorated. And as we transition back into the outdoor area, we have even more viewing areas. And here you can see that this hill is actually really expertly placed over here to break up cross views from this area to the area on the other side of the hill. So it's pretty well done. And the result of that also is that the habitat feels a lot bigger than it is in reality. Not that the habitat is small, I'm not saying that. I think it's a decent size for the group that they have. But in my head it felt so much bigger because you're walking all the way around it and you keep seeing new things, and yeah, it's really cool. It's a really nice habitat. I do like it quite a bit. Then we get to the final zoo of the video. This is the Central Zoo in Kathmandu, Nepal. Yes, I've been to Nepal, I've been to the zoo there. This is the chimpanzee habitat. So because of the sun you couldn't really see inside, but there is an indoor viewing, and over here is the outdoor habitat as well. You can see everyone was gathered around the chimps, which was a bad idea, because the chimps actually sprayed piss over all the guests here through the mesh. Yeah, that's why you don't build a mesh viewing area for your chimps. But the enclosure over here is actually quite okay. It's very comparable, I think, to the one in Amsterdam. And yes, I know I said that one was bad, but I expected so much worse from Nepal, so I was actually quite pleasantly surprised. But yeah, you will see more of Nepal soon, because this Saturday I will be releasing the first part of my vlog series of me going to Nepal. So I hope you look forward to that, and I hope you got some chimpanzee inspiration today. Once again, best wishes for the new year, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, bye bye!